A Gallup poll wants to determine the mean number of books Americans read each year. How many subjects are needed to estimate the average number of books Americans read with a margin of error of 2 books with 95% confidence? Initial results of the Gallup poll indicate that the population standard deviation is 16.6 books. So to determine a minimum sample size that's necessary, we have a formula that works if we're estimating the minimum sample size that we need to use for a mean. So that is the formula Z sub C times sigma divided by E quantity squared. Z sub C is a critical value. We'll talk about that in a sec. Sigma is a population standard deviation. This is all based off of a normal distribution, so you'll need to at least have that as an estimate. But it's fine if you want to substitute a sample standard deviation in this case. E is the margin of error that you're going to use. So Z sub C, that is found, let me write it like this, Z sub C, it's found using inverse norm. Oh, actually, it's just INV norm, sorry, in your calculator. And you're going to put in 1 minus the level of confidence that you have divided by 2. Now, the reason for this is that you want to balance your confidence level about the mean. So let me show you a sketch here. So for instance, here I have a normal distribution of data, and I have approximately 95% of the overall data, within a certain number of standard deviations of the mean. So this is the total. Underneath the entire distribution is 100% of my data. If this is supposed to represent 95% of my data, so let me label that as 95%, then the white areas here in the tails are each 5%, which means half of that is 2.5% in each of the remaining ones. So what that means, if I want to figure out what this value is right here, using the inverse norm function, I always have to provide an area to the left to the inverse norm function. So that's essentially what this is setting up. So to find my critical value, here's what I will do. So I'll go to the distribution menu and down to right here, sorry, the next one down, inverse norm. And inverse norm, I need to provide it an input of 0.025. And the result that it gives me is basically negative 1.96, which, if you'll note, this would be right about here, about negative 1.96 standard deviations from the mean. But up here, this looks about positive 1.96. And that's always going to happen. So you can just use the positive solution here. So I'm just going to say negative of my answer gives me positive 1.96. And that's okay too, because if you'll notice, I'm just going to throw it into a formula that's going to get squared. And when you square a negative, it disappears anyway. So to make sure I get this as accurate as possible, I'm going to leave this whole answer here. And I'm going to take that answer and I'm going to multiply that. So I'm hitting just the multiply button. It takes my last answer times the standard deviation provided, so 16.6. And then I'm going to divide that by the margin of error that I want, which is 2. And then finally, I'm going to square that result. And here, the answer that you give needs to be rounded to the next whole number. So even if this was 264.4, I would still round it up to 265. But in this case, this would round to 265. And that's going to be the number of books, or the number of people that we want to sample in order to figure out the mean number of books that people read.